In 1744, a boy was born in a one-room house on a street so narrow that two people couldn't walk past each other without turning sideways. His family was Jewish, confined by law to a single street in Frankfurt, locked out of most trades, most professions, most of what we'd call ordinary life. They couldn't own farmland, they couldn't join most guilds. They paid special taxes just to exist inside city limits, and every night, the street they lived on was sealed shut by an iron gate, locked from the outside. 200 years later, his descendants had financed kings. They had bankrolled wars on both sides of the battlefield. They had been granted noble titles by an emperor, and they had built a financial network so quietly powerful that some of Europe's governments couldn't move money across a border without going through them first. This is not a conspiracy story. It's something more interesting. It's a story about information, discipline, marriage, inheritance law, and a 5-part plan that outlived every single person who started it. And buried inside it are the actual principles that let one family outlast kings, the same principles anyone who wants wealth that lasts has to understand. This is the story of the Rothschild dynasty, and it starts in a ghetto. Frankfurt in the late 1700s had a rule. Jewish residents could live on exactly one street, the Judengasse, and nowhere else in the city. The street was gated. At night and on Sundays and on every Christian holiday, the gates were locked from the outside. By day, residents could leave to trade, but they had to be back before the gates shut, or they simply didn't come home that night. It was in this narrow, crowded street that Meyer Amschel Rothschild grew up. He wasn't born into money. His father, Amschel Moses Rothschild, dealt in rare coins and ran a small money-changing business, modest work, but work that required something valuable, literacy in numbers, in currencies, in the strange, shifting math of a continent that had no single unified money system. Every German state, every Italian city-state, every principality minted its own coins, with its own metal content, its own exchange value. Understanding that mess and profiting from it required real expertise. When Meyer was orphaned in his early teens, he didn't inherit a fortune. He inherited a trade and a reputation for careful dealing. He was sent to Hanover to apprentice at a Jewish-owned banking house, the Oppenheimers, where he learned the actual mechanics of high finance, how bills of exchange worked, how credit moved between merchants who had never met, how a signature on a piece of paper could be worth more than the gold it represented if the right people trusted it. He returned to Frankfurt in his early 20s and reopened the family coin trade. And he did something patient, almost invisible at the time. He began cultivating a relationship with the court of William, the Landgrave of Hesse Castle, one of the wealthiest rulers in Germany. William's fortune came from an uncomfortable business, renting out Hessian soldiers to fight other countries' wars, most famously to Britain during the American Revolution. It was blood money, dressed up as diplomacy, and it made William obscenely rich. Meyer started small, selling the Landgrave rare coins and antiquities, undercutting rival dealers, being reliably honest in an industry full of people who weren't. Slowly, over nearly 2 decades, he worked his way from coin dealer to trusted financial agent. By 1800, Meyer Amschel Rothschild had become one of William's official court factors, managing part of the Landgrave's enormous private fortune. It was the single most important promotion of his life, and it happened almost entirely because of patience, not luck. And then Meyer did something that changed everything for the family that came after him. He had 5 sons who survived to adulthood, and instead of keeping all 5 close, training them to work together in one office in one city, he sent them away. Here's the plan, and it's worth sitting with, because it was genuinely ahead of its time. Meyer sent his 5 sons to 5 different cities, each one tasked with opening a Rothschild banking house of its own. Amschel, the eldest, stayed in Frankfurt to run the original house and manage the family's relationship with the German states. Salomon went to Vienna, where he would eventually become one of the most trusted financiers of the Austrian Empire. Nathan, the most aggressive and ambitious of the brothers, went to London. Karl went to Naples to establish a foothold in southern Italy and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And James, the youngest, went to Paris, where he would build what became the most powerful Rothschild house in continental Europe. 5 brothers, 5 capital cities, 5 nodes in what was, for the early 1800s, essentially a private international information and banking network, decades before anything like a telegraph existed.
Think about what that actually meant in practice. If a war broke out, or a government was about to collapse, or a harvest failed somewhere, the Rothschild who heard about it first could tell his brothers before official news traveled through normal government channels. And in banking, being early with accurate information isn't a small advantage, it's the entire game. The brothers wrote to each other constantly in a mix of German, Hebrew letters, and private code, so that even if a courier was robbed or a letter intercepted, a rival couldn't easily read it. They built their own courier system, faster and more reliable than most national postal services of the era, using dedicated riders and chartered boats to move letters and instructions between the 5 cities in days when official mail could take weeks. The family crest they eventually adopted, once they'd risen high enough to be granted one, was 5 arrows bound together, representing the 5 brothers, unified even though they were spread across a continent that was almost constantly at war with itself. And they built something else that mattered just as much as the network: trust between the branches. Money moved between Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, and Paris on nothing but a Rothschild's word. A bill issued by James in Paris would be honored by Nathan in London without question, without collateral, without a second party verifying it. In an era when most banking was local, personal, and painfully slow, the Rothschilds had built the closest thing Europe had to a single, continent-spanning financial institution, run entirely by family, bound entirely by trust. By the early 1800s, this network wasn't just moving money for German princes anymore. It was about to finance one of the most consequential wars in European history. Napoleon Bonaparte had a strategy for defeating Britain without ever invading it directly. It was called the Continental System, a blockade designed to cut Britain off from European trade entirely and starve its economy from the outside. For most merchants, it was a disaster. For the Rothschilds, it became an opportunity. Gold and silver still needed to move, blockade or not, especially to pay British troops fighting Napoleon's forces on the Iberian Peninsula, in Spain and Portugal, under the command of the Duke of Wellington. Officially, moving British gold through blockaded, Napoleon-controlled Europe was close to impossible. Unofficially, Nathan Rothschild in London, working with his brothers on the continent, became one of the primary channels the British government used to get hard currency to Wellington's army. It was, in effect, wartime smuggling on an enormous scale, coordinated between 5 brothers across 5 cities, moving British government gold through hostile territory to keep an army funded and fighting. The British government paid the Rothschilds substantial commissions for the service, and more importantly, it proved something to the British Treasury that would matter for decades afterward. The Rothschild network could do things governments couldn't do for themselves. By the time Napoleon's campaigns reached their final chapter in 1815, the Rothschild family wasn't just a group of successful private bankers anymore. They were a financial institution that a government at war depended on. Nathan Rothschild, the son who'd settled in London, became the family's most aggressive operator. And the London branch is where the family's reputation, and a fair amount of myth, really took shape. There's a famous story about Nathan and the Battle of Waterloo in June of 1815. The idea that his courier network got him news of Napoleon's final defeat a full day before the British government found out, and that he used that early information to make a fortune on the London Stock Exchange, first appearing to sell everything to trick the market into panicking, then secretly buying up British government bonds at rock-bottom prices before the official victory news arrived and prices soared. It's worth being honest about this story. Historians have spent 2 centuries picking it apart, and most now believe the dramatic version, Nathan personally standing at the exchange, orchestrating a secret market manipulation on the news, is exaggerated, likely invented decades later by people, some of them politically hostile to the family, who wanted a clean, cinematic story about secret Rothschild power. What's not exaggerated is the underlying truth the myth was built on. The Rothschild courier and information network genuinely was faster than most governments' official channels, for years, both before and after Waterloo. That speed was real. The specific dramatic trading story is legend layered on top of a real advantage. And honestly, that's the more interesting story anyway. Not one dramatic bet on one battle, a system. A network built over more than a decade that consistently got information from Vienna to London or from Paris to Naples faster than anyone else could move it. In an era with no telegraph, no telephone, nothing but horses, chartered ships, and paid couriers, being consistently first wasn't luck. It was infrastructure. It was 5 brothers who'd spent years building relationships, routes, and paid agents across an entire continent. What Nathan actually did after Waterloo was arguably more impressive than the myth. He became one of the primary underwriters of British government war bonds, effectively helping finance Britain's national debt at a scale no single banking house had managed before. By the 1820s, the Rothschilds weren't just financing princes anymore. They were financing entire governments, floating massive bond issues for Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and eventually funding railways, mines, and the industrial infrastructure of a rapidly modernizing Europe. In 1822, the family's rise was formally recognized at the highest level. The Austrian Emperor, Francis I, granted all 5 Rothschild brothers hereditary baron titles, an extraordinary honor for a Jewish family in that era, and one that reflected just how essential Salomon Rothschild's financial support had become to the Austrian state. The brothers adopted a coat of arms built around their 5 arrows crest with a Latin motto that translated roughly to harmony, integrity, and industry, the values Mayer had drilled into all 5 of them from childhood. They had gone from a single gated street in Frankfurt, where their father wasn't legally allowed to own the building he lived in, to hereditary nobility in less than 50 years. But building an empire is the easy part of this story. The next 150 years are about something harder: keeping it. Most family fortunes don't survive 3 generations. There's an old saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, and it holds true across cultures, across centuries, almost everywhere wealth gets built fast. The first generation builds it, the second generation manages it, the third generation, having never known scarcity, spends it. The Rothschilds are one of history's most striking exceptions, and the reason wasn't luck. It was structure. Mayer Amschel Rothschild's will laid out rules that were almost radical for the time. Only male descendants could inherit management positions and partnership shares in the family banks. Daughters received generous financial provision, but not operational control. And, this is the part that mattered most, the family actively encouraged marriage within the family. Cousins married cousins, repeatedly across multiple generations. Nathan's own son, Lionel, married Charlotte von Rothschild, his first cousin from the Naples branch. It happened again and again across the 5 houses, a pattern that would look strange by modern standards. But the underlying logic was pure asset protection. Every marriage that stayed inside the family kept the fortune and the ownership stakes in the 5 banks from being diluted, divided, or absorbed into some outside family's estate through a daughter's dowry. They also diversified in ways that protected them from any single catastrophe. Government bonds remained the core business, but the family expanded aggressively into railways, funding lines like the Chemin de Fer du Nord in France under James' direction, connecting Paris to the industrial north. They moved into mining, becoming major investors in Rio Tinto, one of the largest copper and mineral operations in Spain. And in 1875, Lionel de Rothschild personally arranged one of the most famous single transactions in the family's history, a loan of £4 million delivered virtually overnight that allowed the British government under Prime Minister Disraeli to buy a controlling stake in the Suez Canal before French investors could secure it first. No other financial institution in the world could move that much capital that quickly on a prime minister's word alone without parliamentary approval already in place. If a war devastated one branch's position, the other 4 branches were usually untouched. The 5-city structure that started as an information network became, over generations, a hedge against political catastrophe. No single government, no single war, no single revolution could touch all 5 branches at once, and critically, they stayed private. The Rothschild banking houses were never public companies. No shareholders, no public filings, no obligation to explain their decisions to anyone outside the family. In a century that was rapidly moving toward public markets, public shareholders, and public companies, the Rothschilds deliberately stayed the opposite: private, quiet, and answerable only to themselves. That's the actual secret, if there is one. Not hidden influence, not conspiracy, structure. A family that built inheritance rules, marriage patterns, and privacy into the very foundation of the business itself, specifically designed to survive the thing that kills almost every fortune: time and the people who inherit it. The 20th century tested that structure harder than anything Mayer could have imagined when he wrote his will. The First World War forced the family into an uncomfortable position, different Rothschild houses effectively financing opposing sides of the same conflict, the London and Paris branches supporting the Allied war effort, while European instability threatened the German and Austrian branches simultaneously. The family survived it, but the world around them had changed permanently. Income tax, public stock markets, and modern central banks were steadily eroding the kind of quiet, informal dominance a private banking family could hold over a government's finances. Then came the Second World War, and for the Austrian and French branches, it became an existential threat rather than a business one. In 1938, when Nazi Germany annexed Austria, the Vienna Rothschild Bank was seized outright. Baron Louis von Rothschild, the head of the Austrian house, was arrested and held for over a year before the family paid an enormous ransom, reportedly including control of major industrial assets, to secure his release and exile. In France, the Nazi occupation and the collaborationist Vichy government seized the Paris Rothschild Bank entirely, stripped the family of its French citizenship, and looted much of their art collection, some pieces of which weren't recovered by the family for decades, and a few, arguably, never were. Members of the family scattered, fleeing to Britain, to the United States, wherever they could rebuild. It was, by any measure, the most severe threat the dynasty had faced since Meyer sent his sons out from Frankfurt over 130 years earlier. And yet, after the war, the family did what the family had always done. They rebuilt. The London house, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, had remained untouched by the war and became the anchor the rest of the family regrouped around. The Paris branch was reconstituted, slowly, deliberately. Without the fanfare of their 19th century rise, the Rothschild banking network came back. Here's what's genuinely strange about the Rothschild story today. The family is, by any historical standard, still wealthy, still connected, still involved in banking, wine, and finance across multiple countries. The London and Paris houses eventually merged into a single modern entity, Rothschild & Company, which still operates today as an investment bank advising on some of the largest corporate deals in the world. And in one of the more unexpected turns of the family's story, some of its most visible modern assets aren't in banking at all. They're in wine. Chateau Lafite, Rothschild, and Chateau Mouton. Rothschild, two of the most prestigious vineyards in Bordeaux, are still owned and run by descendants of the same 5 brothers who once smuggled gold across a continent at war. But the family is no longer the single most powerful financial force in the world. And that's not a decline story, it's the opposite. It's what happens when a family that built an empire in the age of horses and carrier pigeons deliberately chooses to stay private and quiet through an age of total wealth. Transparency, when nearly everyone else with real money ends up on a public rich list somewhere. The empire didn't collapse. It just did what old money is supposed to do eventually. It stopped being loud. The 5 arrows didn't need to conquer new territory anymore. They just needed to hold. And that's really the whole story underneath every dynasty we're going to cover on this channel. Building a fortune is a moment. Protecting one for 200 years across wars, revolutions, seized banks, looted art, and 5 generations of heirs who never had to want for anything, that's the actual, much harder achievement. The Rothschilds didn't just get rich. They built a system that outlived the people who built it, and outlived nearly everyone who tried to destroy it too. The Rothschilds proved that 5 people, spread across a continent, with nothing but trust, a shared plan, and rules written into a will, could outmaneuver kings, survive world wars, and still be standing 2 centuries later. But they weren't the only family that figured out how to build something that lasts. We're going to keep uncovering the families who quietly built the modern world, the dynasties whose names you know and the ones you don't. Next, we're going to America, to a man who started with almost nothing, built the largest company most people have never fully understood the size of, and left behind a family that's still shaping global philanthropy today. That's the Rockefeller story. If you want to understand how wealth is actually built and kept, not the loud version, the quiet one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The Rockefeller video is coming next, and you won't want to miss how the story continues.